Okay, Cincinnati finished with a 2-14 record and putting them in last place in the AFC North and giving them the first overall pick in the NFL draft, in which they took Joe Burrow, quarterback out of LSU. I gave it an A minus. I like Joe Burrow. I think this was obviously it was a need for Cincinnati, but I also consider this move a little bit of a gamble, especially when you're talking about the quarterback position. But I think for Cincinnati, it's a gamble worth taking. You look at Joe Burrow, and a quarterback like him with the numbers he put up has never been seen before. But I call it a gamble for a few reasons. Number one, you look at the stats prior to 2019, and it's a little interesting. In his first 3 years in college football, his first two at Ohio State, and then 2018 at LSU, and then 2019 at LSU, he averaged 59.3% completion percentage in his first 3 years, along with only 138 yards a game and an 18-5 touchdown interception ratio, versus last year where he had a 76.3% completion percentage, a 378 yards a game, and a 60-6 touchdown interception ratio. It was quite magnificent. So, was it a fluke season? I mean, and that takes me to my second reason, is because it's a loaded team. They had 14, or it might have even been more than that, players get drafted. They went undefeated. They won the national championship. I mean, they were firing on all levels. It was a very loaded team. And the third reason I call it a gamble is because of the arm strength, which has been a little bit questionable throughout times. I don't think size and stature or hand size is going to be a problem. I mean, you look at Russell Wilson, Drew Brees, it's like everybody was wrong about them. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. But, excuse me, but I think when you look at the arm strength and the fact that the team was so talented, you kind of question the stats and wonder whether or not it was a fluke, and if he can repeat performances like that and excel at the next level. So overall, given his leadership abilities and his high football IQ, and in my opinion, a guy who's perfect for a West Coast offense, I think it's a good pick. I think he'll develop nicely. I think the Bengals could have done better at beefing up the offensive line, but they really didn't address that. But I still think he could be pretty good in this league. So that was their first pick. I gave it an A- for Joe Burrow. In the second round, with the 33rd overall pick, they chose wide receiver out of Clemson, T. Higgins. I gave this pick a B-. I think Higgins actually could be one of the better wide receivers out of this draft class. But the reason I couldn't go overboard and give it an A is because I feel like there were bigger needs on the defensive side of the football and on the offensive line than drafting a wide receiver. They had Boyd. They have two decent tight ends, Eifert being one of them. A.J. Green is coming back next year, healthy. Joe Mixon out of the backfield. I didn't really feel like they needed another weapon, but they went with another weapon. Even though I feel like, again, they had bigger needs. So that's why I couldn't give it an A, but I gave it a B+. But anyways, as it relates to Higgins, I think at 6'4", 216 pounds, he's a red zone threat. A lot of touchdowns at Clemson. He's very good ball tracking ability, especially on the deep ball. He knows how to use his size, which is key for somebody that's 6'4". There's a lot of wide receivers that tall, but they don't necessarily use their size. He's very good at doing that. He ran a 4.54 at his pro day, good enough speed. And I think his biggest fix will be his route running, which seems to be a problem for most, so I don't think that'll be too limiting. So overall, I gave it a B+. They'll get good production out of T. Higgins. I just don't know if it was the right move drafting a wide receiver. That takes us to their third round pick, Logan Wilson, linebacker out of Wyoming. I gave it an A, even though he's from Wyoming. He was a stats sheet stuffer. And it's a definite need for the Bengals to draft that inside linebacker. He's got good frame, 6'2", 241. Coaches have raved about his football IQ. Wilson also has good tackling abilities, and that's very apparent with his 409 tackles and 7 sacks in his 4-year career at Wyoming. And I think he could also drop back and cover. He had 10 interceptions and 14 pass deflections. So dual threat linebacker. He could do it both. Very balanced. So overall, I think it's a need, and they addressed it well. I think they got a good guy who could develop and, help the Bengals defense the best he can. That takes us to their 4th round, 107th overall pick, Akeem Davis Gaither, outside linebacker out of Appalachian State. And I gave this pick a B because Davis played very well last year for App State with 101 tackles, 14.5 for loss, and 5 sacks. He also had 1 interception and 8 pass deflections last year, which is pretty good. I don't think anybody's really questioning Davis's skills on the field, but rather his size, as he's just 6'1", 224 pounds. So while it was good enough to cut it while he was at Appalachian State, it might not be good enough to cut it in the NFL. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops in the NFL and if he could perform at that same level. Otherwise, and if he can, great. If not, he might be more of a backup rotational piece because he still does have a very good skill set. With the Bengals' 5th round pick, 147th overall, they picked Khalid Kareem, defensive end out of Notre Dame. I gave this pick a B-. While Kareem was at Notre Dame, he was very productive. He finished with 108 tackles, 26 for loss, and 13 sacks. His downside is he's just 6'4", 268 pounds. So you might see him as more of a rushing outside linebacker, not a 3-down outside linebacker. He plays hard, though. He is very good off the line of scrimmage and has an above-average football IQ, so it is said. And I think, with a defensive lineman in Cincinnati, they got Dunlap, Atkins. I think they could show him the ropes a little bit, and he could be a good developmental piece for Cincinnati. So overall, I gave that pick a B-. But their 6th round, 180th overall, they picked Hakeem Adeniji, offensive lineman out of Kansas. I gave it a C because while it's a need, I think they waited too long to address it. There wasn't as much talent in the offensive line available in the 6th round. And he's decent, but he kind of lacks the ability, skill, technique needed in the NFL level. So I don't think he'd become a starter, but he could be a backup. But it wasn't really filling their needs. So overall, I just gave it a C. With their 7th round, 215th overall pick, Marcus Bailey, linebacker out of Purdue, gave this one a C-. It's their 3rd linebacker of the draft. They didn't even address their cornerback needs. And I think to go back at linebacker and then also draft him, who, while he was good at Purdue, also had 2 season-ending knee injuries, which is questionable moving forward, and he tends to lack athleticism. So overall, I don't think it was that good of a pick to go back to linebacker and then also to pick him. So overall, in the whole draft for Cincinnati, they just had 7 picks, and I gave it a B-. It would have been smarter, I think, for Cincinnati to address their offensive line needs, getting a rookie quarterback, and maybe addressing their secondary issues. But overall, I think they did well for what they had. They just didn't end very well, so that was okay. But they picked a lot of the players they felt like they would, want and that were best available, I guess you could say, rather than always addressing the need. And then some of them, they tried to get the need but failed to do so at the right time or with the right person. But like I said, overall, they did fine with just 7 picks, so that's why I gave it a B-. Coming up next is the Cleveland Browns draft analysis. And can they turn around this year after a very underperforming 2019 campaign? So we'll see if their draft class will be able to help them. Coming up next, stay tuned. Thank you.